Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started. Okay, so we left off last time in Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. We ended with chapter 49, and we talked about how, sort of the turbulent marriage of Bathsheba and Frank Troy. And then there's the death of Fanny Robin. And Troy just like loses it. And he takes off and it appears that he is dead and has drowned in the ocean. And so it's really kind of a good place to pick up now, because now we're in chapter 50. We're at a point where she's like trying to move on from this. She's like decided, I must be a widow, because at this point it's now been almost a year. Yeah, so she's just figuring out her life. Boldwood, he is again starting to be in hot pursuit, although he's not like super forward yet. And Gabriel, he has become the sort of overseer of both Boldwood and Bathsheba's farms. So he's like rising in the world, doing really, really well. Bathsheba is like kind of hanging on, trying to survive. And Boldwood, we don't even know what he's doing. And we don't know where Troy is. So we're at a good place to jump into chapter 50. So
Yes.
all you.
I mean, every time we get into these, I'm like, this is where it gets good. This is where it gets good.
I know. It's all good.
It just kind of keeps building.
Yeah.
Keeps getting better and better. Yes. So in chapter 50, they are at a sheep fair. Like it's an annual sheep fair in the fall. And lots of people are going to show up here. So Bathsheba and Boldwood are taking their sheep to this sheep fair. And there's a tent on the other side of the fair that has it's like a performing tent. So they're doing a couple of plays in this tent. Coggin and Poorgrass they're trying to go see the plays that are going on. In the back of the tent, well, they think there's a tent behind it, maybe. Yeah, Sergeant Troy is in one of the dressing rooms. Because
there he is.
Back.
He's back.
He'd gotten a job acting in one of these plays. It tells us what he'd been doing. So he had gone to the US to work, this is hilarious, as a professor of gymnastics, sword exercises, and fencing. Yeah. It's a really good visual. So anyway, so he's been in the US. He comes back to England, but he didn't want to come home because he knew what was waiting for him. He was a little nervous. Yeah.
Well, and I thought it was really interesting and just awful that it talks about how he would think about Bathsheba every so often. It'd be like, if I wanted to, I could go back to this beautiful woman in England. But then he'd be like, oh, but her farm is probably failing, and then I'd be responsible for her sustenance. Okay.
And it was his fault.
Awful person. Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So he was like, I don't know if I want to go home. So he had joined this traveling circus, and they hired him because he was a good shooter. And he plays the role of Turpin. It was just going to go on for a few weeks, but he doesn't have a plan of what to do after that. Now, Bathsheba wants to go see this play. So, I don't know, are they going to cross paths? As she's waiting outside the tent, and Boldwood comes up and starts talking to her and asks her about her sheep. They talk about the play. Boldwood says that he'd like to go sit with her. And he says he's already seen it, and so he's not going to stay with her. So he walks her to her seat, and then he leaves. Now, this is just funny because Boldwood is just how it is when you're a teenager and you want any excuse to talk to that boy.
Oh yeah.
Girl, right? So it's like, this is him going up and talking to her about his sheep. He's just like, what can I go talk to her about?
Oh yeah.
I need to just kind of showing his obsession with her again, right?
Totally his obsession, and also sort of his stunted growth in a way, because he's like in his 40s and he's still acting like a teenage boy. And I mean, maybe to be fair, there's lots of men in their 40s that still act like teenage boys. There's lots of grown women that act like teenage girls, but he's just like never had an experience like this. So he has a hard time knowing how to talk to her in a mature, grown up man way. So he's
Yeah.
like, so I have a soldier sheep.
Sheep. How's it going? No,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just his excuse. He's like, well, let's go talk to her about the sheep.
Yeah.
So Troy looks out of the tent, and who does he see?
Bathsheba, because one thing that we learned too is that Boldwood had gotten the seat for her. And what she didn't realize until she went and sat down was that it was like it was like really nice seating, and kind of like everybody could see her. Like hers was kind of the best seat in the house.
There are
So,
people like standing
yeah.
around the edges, right? So he sees her, and he realizes that if this book is so funny. When you really like go into it, it's hilarious. So he realizes that if he talks, she's gonna recognize his voice. And so he goes to the manager and he says, how about if I don't talk? Like I leave the speeches out. And the manager's like, oh, nobody's gonna notice if you leave it out. So go ahead. So he puts on more makeup to try to disguise himself even more. And actually, he tells the manager that there's kind of like an enemy.
Yeah, like a creditor or
Yeah,
something, I think I want to say.
out in the audience, and that's why he doesn't want to talk. But he puts on more makeup, and she doesn't recognize him when he comes out. During the second performance, though, he does speak, and the bailiff Pennyways is in the audience, and he recognizes him. And so he realizes, like, I need to make friends with this guy because he's gonna go tell her and ruin this for me. So he goes, let's see. So he goes into the refreshment tent, which must be like a different tent, and he sees Bathsheba on the other side of the tent, and he sneaks around to listen. She's talking to another man, so he sneaks around to listen to her. I mean, this just cracks me up. Like every time I'm reading, I'm like envisioning this as a play because it's hilarious.
Yeah, and it would be a great play. It would be
Yes.
a really funny one.
And he's above the tent, and he cuts a hole in the tent so he can watch her. It's so funny. But she's talking to Boldwood, and that's who he sees her talking to. And now all of a sudden, he wants her because she's talking to another man, right? Now all of a sudden she's attractive to him. He's embarrassed that he's a circus performer, and so he doesn't want her to know that. He's embarrassed by this job, so he doesn't want her to know why he's there.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny though too, because he realizes he's like, I'm here in this county. People are going to know me. They're going to tell Bathsheba. So I'm going to have to reveal myself to her at some point. But he says that he wants to find out what her temporal circumstances are first. Like he wants to find out how she's doing with money and her farm and everything, which whatever. Anyway, but
yeah,
maybe to like prepare himself.
Do I really? Yeah, I need to know.
Yeah.
And figure out what to do. So Pennyways comes in and tells her that he has private information for her. She says she doesn't want to hear it right now. So he says, I'll write it down. So he writes it down on this piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, it says, your husband is here. I've seen him. Who's the fool now? Probably getting back at her for firing him, right?
Because she has not wanted anything to do with him, and he's really bitter about that. And so he sees this as sort of his own little bit of revenge, I think.
Yes. So he folds the paper and he throws it in her lap and he leaves laughing. And she doesn't look at it right now. So Troy hears all this from above, watching her talk with Boldwood. So he sees that Pennyways comes in and is talking to her and wants to tell her what the situation is. Boldwood offers to destroy the note, but she says she should read it, even though it's probably not anything that important. She holds it in her hand and takes a piece of bread, and while her hand drops close to the tent, Troy slips down, puts his hand under the cloth, and snatches the note and runs away. And she screams. She's like, well, it just happened, right? So Troy then goes looking for Pennyways, and he's in a tent dancing somewhere. And he whispers to him, like, come, you need to come follow me. So is he just gonna, yeah, I read this and then I forget really quickly what happens next. But it's probably just got to do more work trying to make friends with him more.
And I think that that's kind of the bottom line. He's just like, this guy is going to rat me out. So we better strike up some sort of a contract camaraderie.
Yes.
Thing. So
it's just funny picturing him climbing down off the tent, reaching his hand under, grabbing the piece of paper, and she's probably like, what just happened?
Yeah. And I think it even says in there that he is sort of like laughing hysterically as he runs off into the night. And especially as he hears her scream, he's like, look what I got away with. So
what's funny is I think of the three suitors, I mean, we find out later that Boldwood and Troy, they're both totally nuts.
They're both totally nuts. Yeah.
So clearly there is one choice, but does not see it. Okay, so chapter 51 says Bathsheba talks with her outrider is the title of it. So Gabriel is busy. Poorgrass is drunk.
Okay, but it doesn't actually say he's drunk. It says he's suffering from his old complaint, a multiplying eye. He's seeing double again. In other words, he's drunk.
Yes.
So funny.
So Boldwood offers to ride home with her, and so she accepts it because Gabriel's busy and Poorgrass is drunk. It said in there that she'd rather have Gabriel ride with her, but decides I better be nice to Boldwood. She's going to be civil. She feels bad for him because he likes her so much. And what do you think he does again as they're riding home? He starts asking her questions about marriage.
Yeah.
You can't let it go.
Yeah, no. Do you think you'll marry again someday? I wonder where this is going. I don't know.
She says, I haven't thought about it.
Yeah.
Right. And she says to him, I'm not legally a widow. Because, she does think that Troy is dead, but
like in the back of her mind, she has a lot of doubt. Like she's like, I feel like I would feel differently if he was actually dead. So she's really not sure. And at this point, she is kind of using it as a way to sort of push Boldwood back to be like, oh, but it wasn't totally proved that he's dead. So leave me
alone. He could still be alive. But she's like, I haven't thought about it. And then she says, I don't think I'm going to marry again. And Boldwood is like, do you remember when you fainted and I carried you away?
Yeah.
In my arms. And he says, oh, I love this. Okay. First, he says he will never recover from her refusal of marrying him. So I think he's just going to keep asking. But when he refers to the time when she fainted, I love this. Do you remember when I carried you in my arms into the king's arm in Casterbridge? Every dog has his day. That was mine.
Like, oh, can you imagine if somebody said that to you in that circumstance? You're like, okay.
Like, I wonder, I should have looked it up, when every dog has his day. Like, that's a saying we say now.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know what the origin of it was, and it's just so funny. Yeah, and she's just probably like, I can just imagine like rolling her eyes like, are you kidding me? Here we go.
Yeah.
And she feels bad, I think.
She totally does. Like that is literally what leads to all of her actions from here on out is she feels really bad.
So
So
Boldwood asks her if she likes or respects him. She says, well, it's kind of hard to use language that's for men to describe.
I love that quote. Were you going to read it
No,
exactly?
will you read it?
Okay. Yeah, I love it. Because he's like, do you like me or do you respect me? And she says, I don't know. At least I cannot tell you. It's difficult for a woman to define her feelings in language which is chiefly made by men to express theirs. Boom. Like, this is a man's world. And, you know, what, how am I supposed to use your terms to describe how I feel? You know, and because what is important to you is not as important to me. Like your needs are not my needs. So how am I supposed to express myself in the way that's ever going to be satisfactory to you?
Yeah, yeah,
And
like I just can't. There's just no words.
yeah, there are no words. So
It's funny when you're trying to reject somebody. Oh my gosh, like when my kids have got like I can say whatever I want because my children will not listen to this. So when a child I have has been dumped or broken up with, I'm always like, just be happy you didn't have to be the one to do it. Because it's so hard to like
yeah,
turn somebody down or reject them or
yeah,
it's just anyways, I'm always like, I know you're sad, but it's almost worse to have to be the one to like because you feel so bad. I don't know.
yeah.
Anyway.
And it could go on forever and ever with you being miserable. And because you don't know how to say, we're done.
Yeah, and how often do you just I mean, like her kind of I think we've talked about this before, but kind of like say whatever you have to say to make the uncomfortableness go away right now,
Yeah.
but then you have to deal with it again in a week or like
And and that really is an incredible lesson we are getting here is, you know what? So much of this could have been avoided. And it's not that we're saying, oh, Bathsheba, you were wrong. But if it's just a lesson to all of us, like be assertive
yeah.
and say no is no is no. Yes, I made a joke. And yes, that was stupid, but I don't have to pay for that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the end. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's almost better just be honest with how you feel right now. And
yeah.
another funny story is made. We have trouble getting our daughter ready for school. She's
Mm.
5. And my sister is a preschool teacher. So she
Mm.
gave me this great advice the other day. She goes, okay, so what happens eventually? She throws fits, she cries, right? We struggle and struggle and struggle for an hour. I said, what happens? She says, what happens at the end? I said, we finally just like dress her, just force her to get dressed. She goes, do that in the beginning.
Mm.
Because you
Yeah.
just suffered for an hour to get to have the same result. She's like, first of all, you just do it. But the whole time you do it, you talk to her about that. I know it's really hard. I know you don't want to get dressed. Like you're having compassion for her,
Mhm.
but just
But
get
still
dressed.
doing it. Yeah.
So like if she would have just said to Boldwood, like, because she constantly is telling him, I'll think about it. I'll tell you in a few
Mhm.
months.
Like pushing
And
it
he's just
off.
like, no, it's never going to happen. She wouldn't have dealt with all this.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, because and it's just because of her sort of wishy-washiness that he clings on to like the stupidest, smallest amount of hope, even though she's obviously miserable and has no desire to do it. Like to anybody else, they'd be like, okay, she really does not want to. But he's like, but there's a chance.
Yeah. You're leaving it
So
open. And so you're really hurting him.
yeah,
Where if
totally.
you would just say, no, this is never gonna happen, he'd be sad for a few days and then he'd get over it or
Yeah.
months or whatever.
I I mean, I do think that there's a bit of psychopathy in him just because he's like, would you repair the old wrong to me by marrying me? Like at this point, how long has it been since that a little Valentine, you know? And the further you get from something like that, the more you're like, really? Are we really still talking about that?
It's a big way to repent for something
Yeah.
small.
Remember that one thing you did to me a long time ago? Well, you owe me marriage for that.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so she, like I said, she said it's difficult to define her feelings.
Mhm.
And um she does she says, I do regret my behavior towards you. Um, and he says, well, do you think you can make it right by marrying me? That's what you
Yeah.
just said.
Yeah.
And she says, I can't say for sure,
I
but
can't say for sure. Yes, you
maybe,
can.
maybe in 6 years. I'm like, and I wrote down after he bugs her some more, like, maybe in 6 years I'll marry you. Um, she said that seems like a long time, but he says, nope, it'll go by quick. It's short. And he tells her, I am willing to protect you for the rest of our lives. And you might as well just agree with me.
Yeah.
If she marries, he says, you might as well just agree with me. I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your life. And if you marry again, it's going to be me.
Mhm.
Way to go, Boltwood. Just tell her how it is. And then she says, I can't imagine being married again. I can't imagine marrying again, but I won't marry another man while you want me to be your wife. Like, why does she say these
Why
things?
does she say these things? I know.
I just,
Like, let's think for just a minute, lady.
so she hesitates, but agrees that in 6 years she'll marry him. And or she'll think about it, right? She she will think about marrying him in 6 years. And she says, let's just wait till Christmas. Oh,
Yeah.
he convinces her to answer him at Christmas.
Right. To give him a definite I promise or not,
Yes.
which I mean, at this point, she doesn't even have the option of not. Basically, he's like, at Christmas, you will tell me that you promised to marry me. So,
Good job. So, when we kind of switch to like timing a little bit, and Bathsheba is out working with Gabriel, and she mentions Boldwood, and Gabriel says he's never gonna like forget about you. This is just gonna go on and on and on.
mhm.
And then she tells him about the promise that she made to him that she's gonna think about it for a few months. And she said, and I like this too. This is another thing we can talk about. She is worried that he's going to go insane if she tells him no.
Yeah.
But she's like trying to control the situation or control him.
Well, so I think in a lot of, well, because it does say very explicitly that this was no vanity on her part. This wasn't like, oh, he's going to go insane if he doesn't marry me. Like, so, you know, it was literally like she had genuine concern that he was going to go mad if she didn't marry him. So at this point, she has feelings of responsibility for his well being. Right. And yeah, like I think that we see that all the time. In fact, my one of my daughters was in a relationship with a, a young man, and after they broke up, and she actually was the one who did the breaking up because she just felt like it was not good, and hallelujah. But he actually messaged her and was like, I think I'm just gonna kill myself. Yeah, but and fortunately, she's somebody that's like, no, like that is so manipulative. And I am not responsible for your mental health. And like, I have compassion for you and you need some help, but that's not on me.
Yeah.
Who have like, they dated for like 6 months or something. So sorry, his entire life is not now in her hands. But how often does that happen? And people stay in relationships because there's this threat from the other person that they're going to go insane or they're going to kill themselves or they're just going to go back to drugs or drinking or whatever. So, yeah,
Yeah.
super.
So how many stay because they're like, I mean, it's like she feels like she's holding whatever happens to him in her hands. Like,
Right.
if I
She,
tell him
yeah.
this, he's gonna go insane and he might kill himself or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, in that situation, I would just be like, call his parents. Be like, this is not my problem, but I'm just letting you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in that case, I was like, he is just being extremely manipulative. Like, he has never, just in the time that we knew him, there was never any indication that he had issues that way at all.
Yeah.
And he had a very close relationship with his mom. It was just, that was weird.
If I can try to get you back, this might be
Right. Right.
Okay, so yeah, she's worried about him literally going insane. And then Gabriel tells her that Boldwood's been strange lately. And I don't think it really hurt that you promised him that. So Gabriel's kind of like on her side, like, yeah, you did the right thing. But Bathsheba is wondering if it was the wrong thing to do, if it was like morally wrong to kind of lead him on, right? And Gabriel tells her, I don't know if you ever have any quotes, because I didn't write down any quotes here. Like if they're good, let me know. But that he doesn't think there's anything wrong with agreeing to a contract. Like, what?
Yeah, he's like, I think it was fine that you promised. But then he says, the real sin in my mind lies in thinking of ever wedding with a man you don't love, honest and true.
Yep.
So yeah, he's like, I think it's fine that you promised him for his sake, but you can't actually go through with it. That's where the sin would be.
Yeah. And I like this too. She's like, I just wish I could give him some money.
Yeah.
And like this would go away. Like, could I just take care of this issue I
There's
did?
got to be another way to get rid of this problem.
Yeah. How many times would you do that? Like, I always think about that. Like, if I could just hand over $5,000 to lose 20 pounds, I would totally just do it. Like, let's just find a way that money could take care of this issue.
Yeah.
Oh, and then she says, like, that's a lot. Not only if I marry him to make up for this thing that I did, which was like so little, I would have to be married to him, which would be awful, but I'd also have to be around all those women that are in his social class. I just think it's funny that that's what she's worried about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Gabriel says that it depends on whether Bathsheba really thinks that Troy is dead, because everyone else thinks that he's dead. She says that she wants to stop thinking that he might not be, like doubting that he's dead. I mean, can you imagine? It'd be like, I just want to know, right? She just wants to know either way. He suggests that she go talk to like some authorities, right? The parson, the lawyer, whatever. And she's like, well, when it comes to love, I'm just gonna like trust my own opinion.
Well, I love that whole exchange right there. And if you don't mind my reading the quote, because they kind of like Gabriel implies that it is sort of a moral and religious issue. Like, do you go on and marry somebody else when you're not totally sure that your other husband is dead, even though there's a lot of proof that he is? And in a lot of ways, I think that Gabriel is trying to let her know, like, you have an out, this could be an out. So he's like, go talk to Parson Thirdly. I think he could give you some good guidance and advice in this. And she's like, no, when I want a broad-minded opinion for general enlightenment, distinct from special advice, I never go to a man who deals in the subject professionally. So I like the parson's opinion on law, the lawyers on doctoring, the doctors on business, and my businessman's, that is yours, on morals. And he's like, and on love, my own. She's like, I'll take my own advice on love, which isn't really getting her to good places so far. And so maybe, I don't know about the credibility of her whole line of reasoning, but I personally look at it and I'm like, okay, I like that. I can respect that.
So what Gabriel says that that there's like something wrong with her logic. Do you see how he says that in there?
Yes. He's like, I'm afraid there's a hitch in that argument. And it really, I don't think he's disagreeing with the whole argument. I think the hitch is where she takes her own advice on love, because it's like I said, so far that has not served her very well. But I do see the value in like not necessarily going to the person who has a vested interest in you totally buying their opinion on whatever their specialty is, you know? And so, go to somebody who's educated and has done a lot of study, but maybe get their opinion on something other than their specialty.
Yeah, right. Her logic is funny. And he's like, yeah, I don't know if that works. And then, so she pauses to tell him goodnight. And then she kind of says there that she wishes he would ask her to, I mean, she wants to marry him.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she's kind of goes away and realizes she has sort of a sinking feeling because she's like, basically, the only problem with that whole conversation was that Gabriel never put himself in the ring, you know? He had not once wished her free that he might marry her himself. And he never said, I could wait for you. And she'd kind of come to expect that he might do that, even though he'd left her alone. Like, other than being there for her at all the important times, he'd never like forced himself on her at all. He was just there for her, you know? And so she suddenly finds herself being super disappointed that he's not like, well, I could wait for you too.
Yeah, maybe that's the moment when she's like, oh, maybe I am interested in this one.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of, I mean, that's kind of how my husband's personality is. Just kind of quiet and in the background and like, I don't know. I don't know. I was the one that was like pursuing him. I don't know. I don't know that he would have ever. I don't know. I don't know because I pursued him. So
Yeah, I
don't
kind of
know.
love it.
Okay. You're up.
Okay, chapter 52. This, I kind of love the whole setup of this chapter. First of all, it's called Converging Courses. Okay, so we have all these different paths coming to the same place. And the way this whole chapter is set up, it's set up in different sections. There's like section 1. And if you were watching it in a movie, it'd be like, here's the scene of this person, and then you're going to jump to the scene of this other person, and then in a completely different place. And then there's a scene of another person, go back to the first person, back to the second, sort of jumping around a little bit. So the first part, we learn that there's going to be a Christmas party. So we're at the Christmas season now. And so it's like, okay, things are going to happen now because Bathsheba has said, okay, well, if I'm going to promise you, it'll be around Christmas time. Well,
Her deadline
did
has
he say?
come.
Yeah, that's her deadline. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's the kind of funny thing is that there's going to be this Christmas party at Boldwood's home. And people don't really even know how to respond to that because it's so unusual. And you realize that he really has been this extremely standoffish, not super friendly guy. He doesn't have a lot of friends. In fact, some of the details, it talks about how there's all this care and preparation into like making the house look festive, but it doesn't have any of that natural joviality of a festive party. It doesn't feel festive, and it says it seems a lot more forced than really wanted. So now the next scene, the second scene, number 2, we jump to Bathsheba's house. And she's getting ready for the party. And she reveals that she knows the party is being thrown for her. And she's completely mortified by that. In fact, she really doesn't even want to go. She knows that Boldwood is expecting that she's going to accept his proposal. And so at this time, she's like, why did I ever even move here to Weatherbury? Like, let me just redo the last several years and I'll just never even come here, because like it's only led to one like mortification, one horrible circumstance to another. And so she's like, I wish this had never happened, basically. And Liddy convinces her, she's like, no, you need to go. She tries to convince Bathsheba to wear something besides her morning gown. But Bathsheba's like, no, I'm still in mourning. And I know that the custom was like a certain period of time where they were kind of expected to wear black all the time. I'm not sure how long that period of time was supposed to be. I can't remember. Maybe it's a full year. I'm not sure. So Bathsheba, even though she dresses in mourning, she still looks gorgeous. Liddy convinces her that she should go.
I think she's worried about answering him in public.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, why are you having a party? Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah.
I mean, does she know what she's going to tell him?
I don't know that she necessarily does. I think she's hating all of it so much. And I think that you're right. I think she hates the idea of like having this big display and this big party where she's supposed to make this grand gesture and say, yes, I promise to marry you. And that's just not her. And it's really not Boldwood either. That's why it all seems so awkward and out of place.
Comical.
Yeah. So then we flash back to Boldwood. He is very carefully getting ready for the party. It talks about how he never like cared that much about, his dress, but he is now. He's trying to look perfect. Gabriel actually comes in, and Gabriel is like, I'm glad that you seem a lot better than you used to. And Boldwood says, well, yeah, I am super cheerful. I'm very hopeful and blithe. And he's like, I'm a little worried because it seems like whenever I start to get happy, there's something horrible on the horizon. So, but right now I am really happy. And then he says, does a woman keep her promise, Gabriel? And Gabriel's like, if it's not inconvenient to her, she may. Anyway, they continue on this conversation, obviously talking about Bathsheba, and Boldwood is kind of trying to get sort of an impression, like, what do you think? Is Bathsheba going to come through and say, yes, I will marry you? But the thing about it, it's kind of funny because he starts out the conversation with Oak saying, will a woman keep her promise? And Gabriel's a little bit ambiguous on his answer. But by the end of it, like Boldwood has convinced himself that Bathsheba is a woman of her word. And if she promises to marry him tonight, she will be marrying him in 5 years, 9 months, 3 days, or whatever it was. So it was like, no matter what anybody else says, I'm not even going to listen to anybody else. I'm going to convince myself that this is how it is. And I just think it's so fascinating because I think people really can design this narrative in their heads and convince themselves that it's true and they don't listen to anybody else, I mean, that's really human nature, but I think I've really observed this in some people lately that they have designed these narratives. No one can tell them any differently, and you can't change people's minds. So anyway.
Yeah, everything that happens to you is a story that you tell yourself in your mind.
Yeah. And that's really what like you're learning in the coaching sessions and things, aren't you? Like,
yeah.
I mean, because that's really what Jody Moore talks about all the time.
Yeah. And it's like, do you like the story you're telling yourself? Like, what is it giving? What is it doing for you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes it's like, all you have to do is just, I mean, there's a million versions of the story you could tell. So maybe pick one that feels better.
I know. And on the one hand, it's like, I firmly believe in objective truth, but with a lot of humans, there's a lot of things that are so nuanced. It's hard to say, well, yes, this is true where that person is concerned. Because there's so much to it. Like there's so much to people.
Yeah. And you don't know, you're not in their head. So
you're not in their head.
You can't actually know why they're doing something. Mm-hmm. And so the story you're telling yourself about why they're doing something might be painful.
Yeah.
And they're doing it no matter what. So you can't change that, but like you could totally change the story. I don't know.
You can change the story and you might be right and you might be wrong. Who knows? And what is it going to, I don't know what it's going to change.
Yeah, it
So,
doesn't even actually matter what is going on in their head. Because
yeah.
you get to tell the story you want to tell. Like, I just decided, this is funny. So I'm trying to eat better, right? This is like my eternal. If I could solve this problem, I feel like I would have no problems in life. Not true.
Amazing.
But like the story I tell myself in my head all the time is I'm missing out.
Hmm.
Or like
Oh, don't we all do that with
I'm
food?
not
Like,
happy
seriously.
eating like this. And I'm like, I'm gonna change that story and just be like, no, I'm this like it's totally fine. I'm not missing out. I'm here. I'm enjoying my family. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's just the story I'm telling myself about the way I need to eat. I'm telling myself I don't like that food. I don't want to eat that food. I want to eat pumpkin pie all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's painful.
Hmm.
The story is painful. But I'm like, I'm just gonna change that story and say, no, I love healthy food and I love feeling hungry because then I feel thin. That's my anyways, example of like,
That's hard though. That's so hard to find a story that is
yeah,
acceptable to you, that
I'm
you're
gonna
like,
find it.
yeah,
That's
I'm happy
my
with this. Yeah. Yeah, you will.
anyway. All
Awesome.
right. I
Okay.
just aired all of my food issues for y'all.
I think that most people could relate. I really do. Okay. So, scene 4 in the same chapter, we're flashing to Troy now. And we find out that Troy has kind of been looking into the legal ramifications of his behavior over the past year. He wants to find out, like, could he get in really big trouble for just like disappearing and like not telling anybody where he is? And he's sort of gotten really in with Pennywise, and it's been a few months since that fair. So they've been hanging out. And it is amazing that nothing has gotten back to Bathsheba in all this time that he's there. So he's really lying low. And now he sees, oh, Bathsheba is gorgeous. She's amazing. I can't believe I left her all that time. And he also realizes that Boldwood is definitely in hot pursuit of Bathsheba. And that, but what he knows, and I believe that Pennywise says it to him, is that Bathsheba really doesn't care for Boldwood at all.
Yeah.
So Troy decides, I've got to go and I've got to find out what's really going on.
I love that he's like, did I do anything wrong? He's like, he can't imagine that he could get in trouble because they thought he was drowned. But Pennywise is like, well, changing your name. Me.
Yeah.
There's your nail in the coffin.
There might be a few issues.
Pennywise doesn't think that she likes Boldwood for sure.
Right, right. And they do talk about Oak for just a minute. They never even entertain the idea that maybe Oak likes her or that she likes Oak. They're just saying that he's very competent. He's sort of taken over both farms. And so that's why Pennywise is like, well, I better be nice to Troy because otherwise I'm never going to have a place on these farms. And that's what he really wants. So, part 5. Bathsheba is ready to go to the party. She's looking gorgeous. And then she says, I feel wretched at one time and buoyant at another. She's very much up and down. But she says to Liddy, no marrying for me yet for many a year. If ever, 'twill be for reasons very, very different from those you think or others will believe. So basically, she's like, if I ever marry, first of all, it's not going to be for several years. And it's not going to be for the normal reasons. Basically, it wouldn't be for love. And I think that's sort of her way of hinting to Liddy that, like, even if she agrees to Boldwood, it's not because she likes him. It's because her reasoning is that she's kind of been coerced into it. And it's a contract. It's not a bond of love at all. Now we jump back to Boldwood's house, and he and Gabriel are still talking. That's why it really gives this impression of like flashing back and forth.
Yes.
So back to Boldwood and Gabriel's conversation in Boldwood's house. He tells Gabriel that he basically wants to give all the running of the farm over to Gabriel. What I get the impression of is it's almost like giving him a large enough share in the farm that eventually like it's going to be his. And then, and this part, it kills me. He basically tells Oak that he knows that Gabriel has really liked Bathsheba all this time. And so, what is the term that he uses? It's like, he says, the feeling I have about increasing your share is on account of what I know of you. Oak, I have learned a little about your secret. Your interest in her is more than that of bailiff for an employer, but you have behaved like a man, and I, as a sort of successful rival, successful partly through your goodness of heart, should like definitely to show my sense of your friendship under what must have been a great pain to you. So basically, he's like, I know that you care for Bathsheba, but it turns out that I get her. So, and there's a lot of credit that should be given to you because you've seen that I am the one that she is going to have. And so you've backed off.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be friendly back to you and let you have part of my farm, right? Basically, the running of the farm. It's like, oh my cringe. Good grief. So
The arrogance.
Exactly.
And he's like, you must have backed off because you knew I was going to win.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like there wasn't really even any competition. It's just, and I'm the successful one. But what I love about Oak is that he leaves, and instead of being irritated, which anybody else would be, he's like, he's not the man he once was. I think he's a little crazy.
Yeah.
Which is, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, that's maybe the narrative in his head. It just happens to be kind of true, but it also keeps Gabriel like level, to go, okay, maybe this guy isn't a total jerk. Maybe he's just kind of crazy. And he actually is. Now, then here we go. Back to Boldwood's closet. He pulls out a little box, and in it is a ring that, of course, he fully intends to give to Bathsheba. And then he goes down, and the party has started. So, part 7, we're back to Troy. He is kind of like wrapping himself up, sort of disguising himself as he starts heading to the party to reclaim Bathsheba because he's heard about the party. So he's going there. And he has this vision of basically of himself like entering the party, and everybody's like, and sort of this grand entrance. Pennywise is like, I don't think you should do this. I don't think that this is going to go well. And like in
why
any
don't you just
aspect.
why don't you just write her a letter?
Yeah, just let's skip the theatrics and just write her a letter. But then this goes back to like, he's like, oh, but you know what? If Troy does get her back, I'm gonna need to be in his good graces so I can eventually be in her good graces. So he's like, there's no telling to a certainty. Do as you like about going, and I'll just do as you tell me, And so Troy heads along his way, and he's like, well, I'll probably be there about 9:00. Okay. So that was a super long chapter. There was a lot to it.
It reminds me, like, I'm thinking of this as like this big event is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really quickly switching so that it's almost like we're watching all of these scenes happen at once so that this big thing can happen.
Yes, it is. It's the build up to the climax, really. And we get there in chapter 53. So chapter 53 is called concurritur horae momento. I don't know if I said that right. I'm pretty sure it's Latin. Anyways, um, so so funny because before the super intense scene, we get the humorous scene. We get the comedic relief. We get Boldwood's men gathered together with Bathsheba's men, and they're like, okay, we heard that Troy is back, but have you guys seen him? We haven't like totally seen him, but we think we saw him, but not sure. And so they're like, well, we don't tell Bathsheba or Boldwood because we might be wrong. And then they're like, well, we really hope that he's not back because he'll drag her to the dogs. Like he's no good. They can all see that Troy is just dirtbag, and they don't want him to come back. But then they say, well, what a fool she must have been ever to have had anything to do with the man. She is so self-willed and independent too that one is more minded to say it serves her right than to pity her. Like, how could she have gotten herself in this situation? It's her fault, you know? And of course, like she's culpable, you know, she had her choices to make, but that's not, I don't think that's also completely fair to say like she deserved what happened because she let this guy bamboozle her or whatever.
Yeah,
Then,
they decide, like, I just think it's funny that they don't want to worry her for no reason, if it's true.
yeah.
And if it's not, if it's not true, if it is true, they don't want, there's no reason to tell her ahead of time. She's gonna find out.
Yeah.
And then they all agree that she's always been nice to them and has never told women's little lies.
Yeah. 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 So they do have this kind of odd respect for her. They totally do. And they don't want anything bad to happen to her. And they really don't want Troy to come back into her life. And they don't want to worry her unnecessarily, like you say. So then they sort of see it like Boldwood comes out. He's like pacing back and forth because it's apparent that the party has been going for a while, but Bathsheba is not there yet. So he's all concerned. Oh no, what if she doesn't come? But then just as he's out there just worrying himself into a dither, Bathsheba comes down the road. And one of the men is like, I thought he like got over her a while ago. Like a normal person might have. And his man Sam was like, you don't know much of Master if you thought that.
Yeah, she's like, I didn't know it was like that between
Yeah. Yeah. And so Bathsheba comes, they go into the party, and then all these guys that are still outside, they see Troy. And it is no doubt that it's Troy. He's there at the house and he's like looking in the window. And they're like, holy crap. Okay, we maybe should do something now. And so they send, I think, Laban Tall in.
He goes in and he's like, then he just comes back out without having done anything.
Yeah, he does.
He goes in and he's like, he could feel the mood was weird. And he says when he comes back out, I didn't want to make it worse in there. Like I could tell that things were.
Yeah, already kind of a strange feeling through the party. And so I didn't want to make it worse. He just felt awkward, right? And he didn't know what sort of a reception there would be if he said, oh, by the way, Troy's here, you know? So he leaves it alone. But then all the men go in. They're like, okay, well, we're going to do this together, right? And so when they come in, though, they've kind of just missed Bathsheba and Boldwood because Bathsheba is sort of taking a little break. So it's been like hours. And so she's taking a little break in this sort of little dressing room, and Boldwood comes and finds her there. Here we go.
And she knows. So, she's like, I know why you're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he comes in and he says, I've been meaning to talk to you. And she's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm a little.
Yes.
I've been bracing myself for this.
Exactly. And he's like, you know what I want to say? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, so you do give it? She's like, what? He says the promise. And then he decides to use words that he thinks will work for her, like more business-like words. He says, it's a mere business compact, between two people who are beyond the influence of passion. And and it even says like he knew that this was completely false where he was concerned. He was like passionate about her, but he felt like maybe that would be a little more tasteful for her to think of it as more of a business contract, even though kind of a business contract is that? And then he says, it's a promise to marry me at the end of 5 years and 3/4. You owe it to me. And she's like, well, I feel that I do. Anyway, I want like so much of it, like just really gets me. He's so manipulative. He talks about how he was in agony. You wouldn't even let a dog suffer the way that I have suffered. Give up a little to me when I would give up my life for you. Like, this is so little. Just marry me. It's so little when I would give my life for you, and how much you've made me suffer. You owe me this. You owe me this. You owe me this. And so finally she says, okay, it must be since you will have it so. And it even says she's fairly beaten into non-resistance. And in there also, he like goes to put a ring on her. And she's like, no, we can't do that. And he's like, oh, just wear it tonight. Again, like, you owe it to me. You owe it to me. She is sobbing. She like sits down in the chair and you can just see her sobbing, sitting in his chair. And he's like holding onto her hand, just completely in his own world. Like, hello, this woman that you say you love is absolutely miserable. But you're like, oh, well, because I'm going to be happy.
Yeah. Maybe I
Me.
can convince her to love me someday. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
She is completely miserable. So he finally leaves her and goes downstairs and realizes there's something going on. Something going on. And the men come over to try to tell Boldwood something, but just as they're about to, and Bathsheba is coming down the stairs too. Just as they're about to tell him, there's a knock on the door. And this stranger comes in. Boldwood doesn't know who it is, but Bathsheba knows in like immediately. And Boldwood's like, come in, come join the festivities. Of course, he's all, lighthearted, everything. He's finally convinced her to promise to marry him. And it becomes apparent pretty quickly that it is Troy. I think that Boldwood still doesn't get it until there starts to be an interaction between Bathsheba and Troy.
Yeah, he doesn't recognize him. He's like, come in, come in. Like, he's super happy that they have another guest.
Right.
And Bathsheba starts to like falter. She turns pale and like grabs the railing because she's coming down the stairs, right?
Yes. Yeah. And Troy finally speaks. And he says, Bathsheba, I've come for you. She's like, come on, come with me. And she's like had to sit down at this point. She can't get up. So he comes over and he's like, come, madam, do you hear what I say? And then suddenly they hear this voice from the fireplace. And we realize it's Boldwood because he has realized who it is. That is Troy. And he's like, Bathsheba, go with your husband. But she cannot move. Her mind was for the minute totally deprived of light at the same time that no obscuration was apparent from without. Troy like goes to reach for her and grab her and she screams, but her scream is sort of lost in the noise of a gunshot. And smoke. Yep. And when the smoke clears, Troy is on the ground and he is dead. Like he dies like pretty much immediately. Yeah, it just talks about him basically like having this contraction of muscles and then he like sort of gasps and then he's dead. It talks about how it was very close range. And so it just went right through him and kills him instantly. And obviously it was Boldwood. He turned around and grabbed a gun from over his mantle. It talks about how all farmers have guns over their mantle. He had two. He had grabbed it. He had shot Troy and then he tried to turn it on himself. And just at that instant, Sam, one of his men, like intervenes and he ends up shooting the roof or something. And he's like, well, there's more than one way for me to die. And he leaves the house and he walks towards Casterbridge. So all that drama. So chapter 54 is pretty short. It's talking about Boldwood. He's just, almost in a trance, just walking right to Casterbridge jail. He goes right to the jail, rings the bell, tells them what's happened, and it says that he walks the world no more. Like, they're like, oh, okay, well,
come on in.
yeah. I love this though, because back at his house, everybody is in just sort of chaos and bedlam, but Bathsheba is the calm in the storm. It says, deeds of endurance, which seem ordinary in philosophy, are rare in conduct. There's things that it's easy to talk about, but in actual practice, who actually does those things? Very few people, right? And Bathsheba was astonishing all around her now, for her philosophy was her conduct. She was calm in chaos, and she seldom thought practicable what she did not practice. She was of the stuff of which great men's mothers are made. She was indispensable to high generation, hated at tea parties, feared in shops, and loved at crises. And aren't those people in your life? Hopefully everybody has those people in their life that you want them there in a crisis because they're able to remain calm. You have to have those people who are able to see that things get done, that they are the reason amongst the illogic and the chaos. And that was Bathsheba. So Gabriel walks in. He had not been present for any of this. He walks in a few minutes later, like assesses the situation, and she's over there. She's got Troy's head in her lap, and she looks at Gabriel and she's like, I need you to go for the surgeon. Boldwood has shot my husband. He's dead and he's not actually going to need a surgeon, but I want you to go get him anyway. Gabriel goes into town. He gets the surgeon just because of one thing or another. Gabriel takes the time to report what had happened to the authorities just to make sure that things are in order. By the time he and the surgeon get back to Boldwood's house, Bathsheba and Troy are gone. So she had Troy removed to her house so she could bathe him, essentially prepare him for burial, all these things. And both Gabriel and the surgeon are like, whoa, this woman is something else. The fact that she's able to just carry on and do what needs to be done, even in this horrifically emotional and chaotic time. In fact, Mr. Aldrich, the doctor, he says, this mere girl, she must have the nerve of a stoic. And Bathsheba is right there. She's come out of her room because they were sort of standing on the stairs of her house. She'd just come out of her room, and Troy is in there, all bathed and clean with his sheet over him. And she hears the doctor say this. She must have the nerve of a stoic. And she says, the heart of a wife merely. And then at that moment, just everything gives way and she completely passes out. And it becomes evident that the surgeon wasn't needed for Troy, but now his services are needed for her. Yeah. And that takes us to the end of chapter 54.
Now we're 4 months later in March. So we were in December, and everybody is waiting for news about what's going to happen to Boldwood. And they're hoping that he's not going to be put to death. They all knew that he was insane, I think. And that's why he did this. It said everybody knew that he was acting weird, but only Bathsheba and Troy knew how really bad it was that he was acting so strangely. So this chapter is funny. It's short. They found several expensive dresses, jewelry cases in his closet that it said Bathsheba Boldwood on them. So, and the date for 6 years in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that is kind of what sealed it for a lot of people. They're like, okay, he's crazy.
Yeah. He clearly thought that he was going to get her and was preparing for it. Yeah. Creepy.
It is. It's really creepy. Good grief.
Yeah. So Gabriel goes to the malt house and tells him that Boldwood had pled guilty and that he was going to be put to death. And the local people think, again, this isn't right because he isn't morally responsible for his actions because
Mhm.
he was insane. What and they say, well, one example is how he neglected his crops.
Yeah. Like
Look
this
at how
just
he
didn't
was.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. So the people in the town they put in a petition for reconsidering how they're going to deal with Boldwood. And the execution was scheduled for 2 weeks later.
Mhm.
And so on this is a Friday afternoon, Gabriel went to the jail to talk to Boldwood and say goodbye. And as he's leaving, he sees carpenters putting up a post, which would be
Yeah.
to put him to death, right?
So awful. Ugh.
Mm.
Yeah, like the gallows is what I imagine. Yeah.
So when he comes back, the village, kind of half of the village meets him as he's coming back, and he says, there's really no hope. Like, this is gonna happen, just probably because he'd seen the post go up. So Bathsheba's at home and she keeps asking about the news, but Gabriel hasn't come in and talked to her yet. Liddy says that if Boldwood is put to death, Bathsheba's gonna lose her mind
Yes.
and feel responsible for it. And then finally, Laban Tall comes in and says he's not going to die. That they canceled it. They're just going to keep him in jail. Confinement is going to be his punishment. So
Yeah.
thank heavens, because otherwise we would lose the end of the story because Bathsheba would go crazy. So
She would also be insane.
this had to happen. Okay, so chapter 56. She keeps getting better. She's just getting better and better. I think it's getting to be summertime. So she still likes being alone, but is feeling better. She's starting to spend more time outside because it's summer. So for the first time, since December, she goes on a walk out in the orchard and she hears some singing coming from the church. So she kind of goes over to the graveyard. This is the first time she's been over there. And she sees Fanny's tombstone, but under it, it says that Sergeant Troy, Francis Troy, is buried with her in the same grave.
Yeah.
Which is like a knife in the heart and then
It
twisted.
is. But I think that it talks about how she had actually ordered that inscription for Frank.
Oh,
So I think that she did know that. It
Well,
was just like,
that was awful nice of her then, I suppose.
yeah.
So she's listening to the children sing in the church and she starts to cry, wishing that she could be young like the children and innocent and not have had to deal with all of this.
Well, and also it just from as I was reading it, I was like, that music, they were singing Lead Kindly Light, which is a beautiful song, and you hear children sing it. And at that moment, it just hit different. It was just like suddenly all of her emotions and her pain and her suffering from the past years just bubbles over. It talks about the swelling in her throat, which we all know, and the, overflowing at her eyes. And it just hit different. And she broke down.
That happens to me when I'm listening to music sometimes. Like,
Me too.
I'm usually listening to talking, but then occasionally I'll get in the mood for music, which like lately is Christmas music, right? And then I just
Yes.
like the Christmas music or the whatever, it just makes me start thinking about things and then I'll just be like, "Ah," lose it.
I know.
It's just funny. Music is powerful. Okay, so she sees Gabriel, who says that he's going into the church because he's one of the bass singers. But then he's like, I don't know if I'm going to go in tonight because he doesn't want to lose Bathsheba. He doesn't want to turn her away, or he's worried she's going to leave. And they must have not seen each other for a long time because he says that, like, I haven't seen you for so long. But he's been meaning to ask her about a business matter. So he's thinking about leaving England and going to California because he doesn't want to manage Boldwood's farm. And she's like, I can't be without you. Like, how would I take care, I think it said in there that she hadn't been to the sheep market at all since Troy's death. And so he'd been doing that for her. And she's like, how could you leave me when I'm so helpless? Like, I need you. He says, that's why I need to go.
Yeah. It's because of that helplessness that I have to go.
Yeah.
Which shows you that he is the complete polar opposite of Troy and Boldwood, because he would never take advantage of her in her helplessness.
And they wanted her no matter what.
Yeah.
And
Well,
whatever.
and they kind of wanted her to be helpless.
Yeah.
They sort of pushed her to be that way so that they could take advantage of her.
So he leaves, and Bathsheba is like so upset that the one person that she's relied on all this time is now abandoning her also. And then weeks go by, and Gabriel is not paying any attention to her. He's not really paying attention to her farm. Like, and she thinks he must hate me. I must have done something here.
Yeah. It's again that narrative that she's built in her mind, because she's decided that he must despise her. And now she feels like everybody else is treating her weird too. And so she's like, Gabriel must be the ringleader of this. What have I done? This is horrible. She's built up this whole awful self-sabotaging narrative in her mind. So
he's avoiding her, which makes her think that he hates her. So Christmas comes again, and she's walking from the church, hoping to cross paths with Gabriel again, probably always. She had been in the church and had heard him singing, and so she knew he was there. When he comes up the path, he looks the other way and then disappears. So again, avoiding her.
Yeah. Painful.
Yes. So the next day, Bathsheba gets this formal letter saying that he's going to be gone by Lady Day. Yeah. And she's so upset that, she's upset that he doesn't love her, is wondering how she's going to do this without him, what she had done to upset him, all this. So after dinner, she decides to go to his house, and she asks to speak to him. He's like, I don't have the right kind of house for you to come in and visit with me. Yeah. She's like, I don't care. Coming in. So then she just explains, I feel like I've offended you. I can't let you leave without telling you, because I need to know what the situation is here. Why are you avoiding me? He says that's not the case. And he's decided not to go to the United States. Mm-hmm. He's going to just go to a different farm.
To Little Weatherberry. And I'm not told, I'm like, I guess I'm dumb, but I think Little Weatherberry Farm is Boldwood's farm. I think it is.
So Gabriel said that he would continue to watch. He would have decided to continue to watch over her farm if there wasn't all this gossip about them. Mm-hmm. The gossip is that he had been waiting around for her to agree to marry him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that paints him in not a very nice light. And he's like, that is not me. That's not what I'm going to do. And so don't
you want to just shake him though and just be like, why did you not just ask her to marry you? Or I don't know. All seems so unnecessary.
It does. But at the same time, he had been rejected hardcore. Yeah, and she'd continued over the years to say things like, oh, you're like a brother. Oh, I would never love you, but
or telling him to leave.
Friend. Or telling him to leave, all these things, and then making these stupid choices with these other men. And then, her heart's broken, and he has sense enough to be like, okay, we're going to just let her lie for a little while, Yeah. So I don't know. I think all of it was kind of necessary.
Yeah. But, well, I guess I just wish he would have I don't know, not the last few months. Why didn't he just step in and say, I love you, I want to marry you? She thinks that's absurd that people would be saying that. And he agrees.
Well, because she says, that's absurd. It's too soon. But he latches on to the part where she says, that's absurd. She's like, no. I mean, it's too soon. Let's talk about that.
Right.
It can happen. Just, give it a minute type of thing.
Yeah. Is it probably, just because of what they've been through, she's like, I needed some time. Gabriel says that if he only knew whether she would marry him, whether he could marry her.
Yes.
She needs to know. And she says, you never should have sent me that cruel letter. And he's like, I had to be careful. I'm like an unmarried man. Everybody knows how I feel about you. This hasn't been easy on me. He's like, I had to do it this way because I have to be careful. So she gets up, says that she's glad that she came and talked to him. And but she didn't come there to court to like have this conversation, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
She just wanted to know why he didn't like her or why he was upset with her and leaving. So he walks her home. And now you're gonna have to help me with this because I'm like, they walk home, they don't really talk about their feelings, but then in the next chapter they're getting married. So do they decide to get married?
They do, because really, like that whole conversation at the fireside, he's like, Bathsheba, he looks her long in the face and he comes closer, he looks at her tenderly, whatever. He says, Bathsheba, if I only knew whether you would allow me to love you and win you and marry you after all, if I only knew that. And like you say, she's like, you'll never know because you never ask. And then it's almost like that. It's like, oh, well, then of course, there's sort of this understanding. He gives this low laugh of joyousness. And you're right, like he gives this explanation of the letter, but then she says, how glad I am that I came. I've danced at your skittish heels, my beautiful Bathsheba, says Oak, for many a long mile and many a long day. And so, yeah, it may not be that there's this overt, will you marry me? Yes, I will. But it's like, there's this understanding there, between them.
Did I miss
And
it?
yeah, not necessarily, but it's sort of implied rather than declared. Yeah, but I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but I love that last paragraph of this chapter. To me, that's like the best part of the whole book.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. So it does talk about them walking home together, and they don't speak about their mutual feelings because those are unnecessary between such tried friends. They have this relationship that is not this, Twitter pated fluttery kind of love. It is the love that comes after years of trial. So here's what he says. Theirs was that substantial affection which arises when the two who are thrown together begin first by knowing the rougher sides of each other's character and not the best till further on. It's like you see the worst first, and then you start going, oh, but look at all this. Look at all this. Oh, he's actually amazing. She's actually amazing. The romance growing up in the interstices, I don't know if I said that right, of a mass of hard, prosaic reality. They've been through some crap and they've been there through that crap together. This good fellowship, camaraderie, usually occurring through similarity of pursuits, is unfortunately seldom superadded to love between the sexes because men and women associate not in their labors, but in their pleasures merely. It's like we often don't have the best relationships between men and women because we do things together that are fun instead of, which is not bad, but we also need to do the hard things together because that's how you really get to know somebody. And that's what Bathsheba and Gabriel have done all this time. They've done the hard things together. He says, where, however, happy circumstance permits its development, the compounded feeling proves itself to be the only love which is strong as death, that love which many waters cannot quench, nor the floods drown, beside which the passion usually called by the name is evanescent as steam. So anyway, I love that. And my thought was that Bathsheba has now experienced at least 3 types of love.
Mm-hmm.
She has experienced just the passionate love that overrides all logic and feeling. She's experienced this sort of coerced love where Boldwood just sort of forces her into it, and she's like trying to make herself get there, which is awful. And now she's experienced actual, true, real love, which most couples have to work for years and years and years to get to, even when they're already married. Because a lot of times they start out with sort of the passionate part of it, but then you have to work to the real, true love. Anyway, I think it's amazing.
It's paragraphs like that I'm like, oh my gosh, deep. Like you have to really read it closely.
So yeah,
to get what he's trying to say. This is not like when I'm telling people what we're going to do, that we're reading this next, I'm like, it's hard. It's a hard book to read. Like,
yeah.
And that's kind of was the idea of doing the podcast, is like, I struggle with this kind of stuff, and I would love to have a podcast that I could listen to that would explain it. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's what happened. That was
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
okay. So for the last chapter, we've made it 57 chapters.
A long book. It's almost a 400-page book, probably depending on the
Of
publication.
hard reading. Anyways, it's called A Foggy Night and Morning, and then conclusion. So basically, we're gonna have a wedding. She wants it to be quiet, secret. She thinks it's inappropriate to have it be big. They want it to be secret. They want Laban there. But
because he's been made a clerk, like he's been made a clergyman. It's
he's
like
gonna marry
so
them.
random. Yes. What does it say exactly? He'd lately been installed as clerk of the parish and was yet in mortal terror at church on Sundays when he heard his lone voice among certain hard words of the Psalms, whither no man ventured to follow him. He's like, oh, is this me talking? Oh, crap.
It reminds me of
Oh.
Gilmore Girls. Have you ever watched that show?
Yes. Oh
So
my
the
gosh.
guy, the one guy that's in it that plays, like, he has every job. He's like the one that moves around the town and has like
Kirk.
yeah,
He's
Kirk.
my favorite.
Which is funny because we just watched him in a show where he was a horrible. I'm not gonna say.
Oh, really? Yeah, I've never seen him in anything else.
He was like in a horror show, and it was like,
Oh,
oh, this is interesting. A little different than Gilmore Girls.
love it.
I'm not gonna out us on what we were watching because anyway, so they need him, but his wife is such a gossip that if they go tell him in front of her, everybody's gonna know by morning, and they'll probably all be at the church.
Yeah.
So they come up with this scheme how they're gonna tell him. They're gonna bring him outside, or Coggan's gonna do it. It's gonna bring him outside and tell him so she doesn't hear. They go there, and she's not there. So he makes up this story about why Laban needs to come to the church in the morning.
Yes.
On the spot. He's like, let's see, how could I get him here?
Yes. And I do love that, like, Gabriel was going to do this all by himself, but he came across Jan Coggan on the road. And Jan Coggan really has been this true friend that's been there for him through everything. So Gabriel does confide in him and tell him that they are going to get married. And then Jan helps him with this whole scenario.
Yes.
So I really love that. A good friendship.
Yeah, he's been here all along. Then we go back to Bathsheba. She can't sleep. She gets Lydia up to brush her hair. And she tells her, Gabriel's going to come and eat with us later today. And forever.
Forever. Can you come for dinner?
Yeah.
Can you come forever?
Then she kind of whispers into her ear exactly what's going to happen. They're going to go get married. So, and Lydia's all, woohoo,
Yeah.
This is like the party. So 10 o'clock, Gabriel comes and knocks on her door. They go to the church arm in arm. This is the first time they have walked arm in arm through the fog. Can you picture it? They're like,
yes,
arm in arm through the fog.
So sweet.
And then it happens. They go and they get married with Coggan and Laban, and I think is Lydia there?
Yes,
she's there. And then later that night, they are sitting down at Bathsheba's house, and they hear a cannon and trumpets. They go out to the porch and they see all these, hear all these instruments. And Mark Clark and Jan Coggan have gotten the village to come and perform for them. And he thanks them, and then they tease him because he said he called Bathsheba his wife too easily. And the end.
Yeah.
We're done.
And they thought it was so sweet. Everybody loves them. And it's this sweet village that is like, we're going to get together and celebrate them. They didn't want a big to do, but we're so happy. We're going to celebrate
anyways.
them. Yeah. It's really, really sweet.
So that was a long book. And a lot.
So good. Yeah. Yeah. So much. And yeah, just so much to really digest. There's so many times that I have shared a quote and I'm like, I love this and it's amazing and deep and I can't even really explain it. And so I think that there's just a lot to sort of dissect and think about, and why is it's so good and so wise.
I loved going deep just because it's like, I'll never, I mean, I have this book in my mind. Like, I know, I don't know. This is the second time I've read it.
Mhm.
I think I had no recollection of what had happened in it. In the beginning I was like, oh yeah, there's three guys, and I didn't remember the ending, but I think I always will now. I mean, because
Yeah.
we studied it.
Yeah. On that note, so I told you that my book, this version, is pretty old. And the afterword, it says something that I thought was really wise. It says, to read the work of any famous author is in itself something of an art. And I think we'd have to agree. Like,
Yeah.
to read the work is an art, first of all, to really strive to get into their head, get into the culture, get an understanding of what it is they're trying to say. But it also says a reader must develop the poise of courage in order to stay the judgments of his elders until he can read the work for himself. I'm not sure who does the afterword. I'll have to look that up. But so basically, like, oh, it's James Wright from the University of Minnesota. So basically, to say, well, all these people say it's amazing, but I'm not going to make that judgment until I've read it. I'm not going to go into it thinking it's amazing. Or all these people say it's just a copy of other great works. Or he's really not that good. He thinks he's good. Or, so you have to like withhold judgment until you've read it for yourself.
Mhm.
And I think that's really true. And I think I'm a little bit baffled that some would think that Hardy was not that great of a writer, or that it's irrelevant or anything like that, because I love it. I think it's
Yes.
so fantastic.
Yeah, it was fun to dive deep into it and study it. And yeah, now I feel like I know this book. Like, it's great.
Yeah.
I asked some people, because I couldn't think of any books that would be similar to this, what they thought about similar books. And I got a couple by George Eliot. Have you ever read George Eliot?
So, like Silas Marner,
Yeah, so that was one.
I
And the other
have
one was
actually not.
Adam
But
Bede, maybe Bede, I don't know. So those were the two books that people recommended. And then another person said, which you've read, what was it? The Native Return of the
oh,
Native.
The Return of the Native,
That that
because
was
it's another one by him. Yes.
yeah.
And I think that that's the main thing that I would recommend, is just reading more by Hardy, reading Tess of the D'Urbervilles, reading Return of the Native. Yeah, those would be my top recommendations after this one. So,
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to rack my brain about books, modern books that were similar, and nothing was coming to me. But yeah, so I asked online. I was like, oh, help me out here. Maybe someday we could do a George Eliot book.
yeah, we should.
Did you have anything about Thomas Hardy?
He was born on Egdon Heath, near Dorchester. He was born in 1840 and he died in 1928. He was actually homeschooled by his mother before he started attending grammar school. At 16, he was apprenticed to an architect, and for many years, architecture was his profession. He did write poetry during that time, and poetry was his sort of first and last love. His first novel was written in 1867, so he was about 27 when he wrote his first novel, but it was rejected, so he destroyed the manuscript.
Oh no.
Like, all right, well, heck with that. His first published book was printed actually at his own expense and was a financial failure. But by 1874, he was convinced that he could earn his living as an author, and he retired from architecture. He took a big risk. He retired, he got married. He retired from architecture, he got married, and devoted himself to writing. So he was quite a bit older. He was like 34 when he got married. So he just continued to write from there. But in 1896, He was very disturbed by the public outcry against his two novels, Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure, because I haven't read Jude the Obscure. I would really like to, but people didn't like Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And I think same thing for Jude the Obscure because it dealt with sexual issues. Like, and the thing is about it is it's not explicit.
No.
It like at all, but it does talk about some of the issues that women faced, especially. And so he was like, okay, people hate me. Sorry for bringing this up, So then he was like, well, I'm just going to write poetry for the rest of my life. But we don't know him for his poetry. We know him for his amazing books. So, and this guy who did the afterword, he said a lot of people thought that he would just go into obscurity because they felt like, oh, he's not as good of an author as some others, and his are like a copy of George Eliot, who's actually a woman, and so he's not going anywhere. But his books have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
So don't take anything for granted.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I just think about like composers too that they don't find success until after they die.
Yeah. And artists.
Yeah, sad when that.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, he found success, but then he got canceled.
Yeah, he did. You shouldn't be talking about this. How dare you? And again, like what we talked about, I think that he did what I read somewhere, maybe it's in here, is how he did not really love organized religion, or maybe I just drew that from like everything he says in his books. I think he did not love organized religion, but I think that he did have a strong belief in God. I think there are so many, first of all, Bible references in this book, but also just his descriptions of nature. And when he talks about how God was palpable in the country. And I just heard this poem by Elizabeth Barrett Browning the other day. And I was like, why haven't I known that before? It's so beautiful. Because as soon as I heard it, I thought of Thomas Hardy's books. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, it says, this is part of the poem. Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. And only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit around and pluck blackberries. First of all, it's like such a powerful, beautiful piece of poetry itself. But I think that's Thomas Hardy. Like his books, he just expresses his love for God in his descriptions of nature. And it's like he is worshiping in that way. He notices. And so he's taking off his shoes in the way that he so carefully and immaculately describes everything. So
yeah, it makes me want to read more stuff by him. So first of all, let's announce our next book. It's going to be The Wind in the Willows.
Yes, by Kenneth Grahame.
So in 2 weeks, we're going to start The Wind in the Willows. And next week, we're going to do a bonus episode about our favorite podcasts.
Yeah. And I'm really excited because I'm excited to hear yours and I'm excited to share some of mine.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So some might be book related and some might not.
Yeah, they're just anything.
Yeah, that'll be really fun.
We're so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you'll join us next week as we talk about our favorite podcasts. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.